spiritual substance as persons. And so the only proper outcome of studying the Bible is supernatural growth in the power of love. Love of God and love for all peoples. We could call this the 1 Corinthians 13 test for the study of Scripture. If I understand all mysteries and all knowledge and have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And so the test of whether or not we have really gotten the point of the Bible is the quality of love that we show in our lives. Now, this reading with the heart, this way of approaching the biblical text, has a very long and time-honored history among the people of God. It even has a name: Lectio Divina, divine or spiritual reading. What does Lectio Divina mean? It means listening to the text of Scripture, really listening, yielded and still. What does Lectio Divina mean? It means submitting to the text of Scripture, allowing its message to flow into us rather than our trying to master it. What does Lectio Divina mean? It means reflecting on the text of Scripture, permitting ourselves to become all over engaged, mind and heart, into the drama of the passage. What does Lectio Divina mean? It means praying the text of Scripture, letting the biblical reality of this with God life give rise in our heart to the cry of gratitude or confession or complaint or petition. What does Lectio Divina mean? It means applying the text of Scripture, seeing how God's holy word provides a personal word for our life circumstances. What does Lectio Divina mean? It means obeying the text of Scripture, turning, always turning from our wicked ways into the way everlasting. Let me just give you one tiny little example of Lectio, of reading with the heart, that I personally have been experimenting with in recent months. It's by taking the Psalms, which of course is the prayer book of the church, and to give a psalm 3 readings. Now, you don't want to do this with Psalm 119, but a brief psalm. Just first to settle your heart and slowly read through the psalm. And then with the second reading, just to take a highlighter. And as you read, allowing the Spirit of God to come and this phrase, this sentence, this passage, and just highlighting the passage. And then with the third reading, just to read the highlighted portions and see if there isn't one verse, one phrase, one passage that seems to be lifted off the page a bit. And then usually I would write that on a 3x5 note card, and often, especially if it's a brief passage, to just very easily memorize it and walk with it through the day, allowing that word to become a word for me. For example, I remember when I went to Psalm chapter 9, the 9th Psalm, the phrase, "Be gracious to me, O Lord," and just living with that. And any number of psalms. But the one I've come back to again and again in, 5 or so months. And so maybe the Lord is lifting it up, and I've wondered if perhaps it could be a special psalm for our time together these 3 days. It's Psalm 95, 6 and 7. Many of you, I'm sure, know it. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. For He is our God, and we are the people of His pasture and the sheep of His hand. Oh, that today you would listen to His voice. Isn't that a wonderful song? You can live with that. So I call you, I call myself to trust that living water that flows from Christ through the Bible and into the hearts and minds of a thirsty people. May we open ourselves to it. May we receive the life that is life indeed. May we swim in it, live in it daily. May we constantly submit ourselves to this life that comes from God alone, this with God life, this Zoe life. Let me conclude with the story of God's great Zoe life, told to us by Amy Carmichael, that great missionary to India. And it comes from her book, Gold Cord. And it's about a little child named Lula. Listen to what she writes. Lula was 5 years old, a Brahmin child of much promise. She had sickened suddenly with an illness which we knew from the first must be dangerous. We could not ask the doctor to leave his hospital a day and a half distant for the sake of one child, but we did the best we could. We sent an urgent message to a medical evangelist who lived nearer, and he came at once. Still, he arrived an hour too late. But before he came, we had seen something wonderful. It was in that chilly hour between night and morning. A lantern burned dimly in the room where Lula lay. There was nothing in that darkened room to account for what we saw. The child was in pain, struggling for breath, turning to us for what we could not give. I left her with 2 co-workers and, going to a side room, cried to our Father to take her quickly. I was not more than a minute away, but when I returned, Lula was radiant. Her little lovely face was lightened with amazement and happiness. She was looking up and clapping her hands as delighted children do. When she saw me, she stretched out her arms and flung them around my neck as though saying goodbye in a hurry to be gone. Then she turned to the others in the same eager way, and then again, holding out her arms to someone who we could not see, she clapped her hands. Had only one of us seen this thing, we might have doubted, but we all 3 saw it. There was no trace of pain on her face. She was never to taste pain again. We saw nothing in that dear child's face but unimaginable delight. We looked where she was looking, almost thinking that we would see what she saw. What must the fountain of joy be if the spray from the edge of the pool can be like that? That, my dear friends, is Zoe. God's eternal kind of life. We enter into it here